Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt down here in the catacombs for the Remnant Underground on a cold and snowy night. Snow is pouring down out there. Pouring down. Is that the right verb? Pouring down? Is snow pour down?
I think that'll work.
Does that work? Okay. Yeah, so snow is coming down outside, and it's very cold here in Minnesota. So it's a couple days before Christmas. We're really excited about celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ. So it's Merry Christmas. It's not Happy Holidays, of course. For this program, however, we are going to try to present something that's a little bit on the positive side for a change, despite the fact there's a lot of bad news out there. We have an interview with a gentleman who is not unfamiliar to a lot of Remnant Underground viewers, Kent Wuchterl from the Argument of the Month. And we interviewed him on the question of traditional Catholicism and whether or not it's possible for a person to be a traditionalist who does not go to the Latin Mass. In my opinion, it is very possible. There are a lot of people out there, a lot of Catholics today, that are seeing the same things that we're seeing, and they're not happy. They're dissatisfied with the way things are going. They want to lay claim to their Catholic identity, to their Catholic liturgical heritage. They're trying to find ways to do just that. And I think it's very important for traditionalists, quote unquote, to recognize brothers in arms that we have all across the country, in fact, all across the world, who are dissatisfied, who are trying to restore some sanity to the Catholic Church, and who at this point are not prepared to leave their parishes. So instead of leaving, they're staying in their parishes and they're trying to fix the situation. They're trying to remedy the problem in the liturgy and so forth. But we have a huge coalition growing throughout the whole world that is dissatisfied with the way things are going, liturgically, morally, doctrinally, and every other way. And I think at Christmas time, it's very important to realize that we're not alone, that there are millions and millions of people around the world who are trying to find some way to restore Catholic identity. So we sat down with Mr. Wuchterl, had a little conversation, and I think you'll find some of the things that he had to say to be very encouraging, especially this time of year, especially in the sense that there are a lot more people who are what we would call tradition-minded Catholics than you might think otherwise, just looking at the newspapers or reading the media and so forth. So take a look at this interview, and we will see you next year. That's only a few weeks away, but next year we do have a new format for the Remnant Underground that we're very excited about. So keep an eye out for that, and Merry Christmas, Happy and Holy New Year to you all, and we will see you next year. God bless. Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt for Remnant TV. I am in the bunker for the Argument of the Month. Our friend and ally, Kent Wuchterl here. Kent, how are you? There he is. We wanted to talk tonight, have a little discussion, as soon as we're done firing up our cigars, about this whole idea of what constitutes a traditional Catholic. Now, I think that there is a prevailing definition or opinion about what traditional Catholicism is, and that is those who attend a traditional Latin Mass. That makes one a traditionalist. I would like to posit something that maybe is a little bit of a curveball on that, or a nuance on that, and that is that there are many people, many men and women in the Catholic Church today who are what I would call tradition-minded Catholics. And this means that while they, for whatever reason, have not yet discovered the traditional Latin Mass or don't have access to the traditional Latin Mass, nevertheless live their Catholic faith in accord with tradition and based on a formation in tradition and a very serious appreciation for tradition. That's not always easy to find nowadays because our church has been in a state of crisis and revolution for a long time, certainly for the past 2 centuries. So I wanted to ask Kent Wuchterl here, my friend, who Kent, now you do not attend the traditional Latin Mass. Tell me, I know you're new to the whole idea of the traditional Mass. I know you've attended a couple of them, and why don't you just tell the folks, in general, your impression about the liturgical question in the church today, and how you reacted, for example, when you went to your first traditional Latin Mass.
It was I kind of would sum it up as it's a Mass for grown-ups. Because it requires that you pay attention and that you pray. The other thing that really struck me was the language that was used. I mean, when you're sitting there looking at the missal and looking at the prayers that are translated, it seems much more penitential. There's a lot more reverence. I mean, you know that there's something fantastic going on up there. And the focus is there, but it is, I have to say, it is harder to get into. And I think that if you're not well catechized, a or if you're not understanding, that is Jesus Christ being made, body, blood, soul, and divinity being made present right there on the altar, you have a hard time getting your mind around that. And I know that's been a problem in my family, is that I'm very curious and very interested in it. I want to know more about it, and I also just have a very deep love for God, and I want to give him all the reverence that I can and do what I need to love him the best that I can. And that's really what I found in the Latin Mass. The few times that I've gone is really a lot of. I thought it was actually very emotional at times, and just in the whole presentation of Christ and the prayers, it was very moving for me.
So what do you think? Now, you're a man who is very concerned about, your own Catholic faith, obviously, but also you're a Catholic activist. You go out there every month and you organize events, debates most often between Catholics, sometimes a more liberal or mainstream Catholic versus a traditionalist Catholic. So you're interested in this discussion, obviously. Yet you yourself, throughout your whole life, have more or less not had access to the liturgical patrimony of the Church. Is there a sense of feeling, I don't know, somewhat robbed by the fact that this is, as a Catholic, this is our heritage, this liturgically, we own this, it's ours, and yet we can't find it, we don't have a lot of access to it. Is there a sense with you, having exposed yourself to it now, gee, I wish I had maybe found out about this a little earlier in my life as a Catholic, as a cradle Catholic?
Yeah, I really do. I wish that there would have been a little bit more openness to it. That would have been presented, because there are things that you find in the Latin Mass that you don't see in the Novus Ordo, and because the Novus Ordo, for let's just be honest, it's all over the place. You don't know really how it's supposed to be done. Going to the Latin Mass really does draw you in. We hear so many people talk about praying and have that internal life. That's what really drew out of me, was that internal praying, understanding what's going on, and just kind of a hunger for wanting to know more about it. Mm-hmm. Why are we doing what we're doing? And talking to yourself, and understanding the motions and why we're doing what we're doing is just fascinating to me. And it just seems so much more of a loving relationship between God and yourself. I mean, I do find that there is, I still very much respect the Novus Ordo and for what it can be, and for what many priests do make it when they do it very reverently. But I do understand that it's because we have so many people that are so used to it, that it's too hard for them to jump. And I have a little background in Latin. You were a seminary. That's right. In the seminary, I had to take 3 semesters of it in college, and so you can follow. I can follow a little bit better and understand what's going on, and that's just really what I don't know. I have a growing love for it more and more. The more you learn about it, the more you're wanting to learn more. It's interesting because just as I, as a traditionalist Catholic, I recognize that there are priests such as your own pastor over here in Forest Lake, Minnesota, over the past few pastors, in fact, who've been really trying as much as they possibly can to restore some dignity to the tradition, to the Novus Ordo Mass. They've even, redesigned the sanctuary. I think some of that had to do with you and your friends kind of calling for the pastors to sort of reinstate some of the traditionalist attitudes. But I think what's interesting about you, and which is one of the reasons I wanted to pick your brain a little bit tonight, is because you don't have this sort of animosity towards the traditional Mass that oftentimes we see, a certain resentment toward it. And that's always been, for me, a real curiosity. As Catholics, even if we're not used to the traditional Mass, somebody like yourself who didn't grow up with it, why there would be an animosity toward it. It just doesn't make any sense to me for Catholics not to have just a simple intellectual curiosity about the liturgical form of the Catholic Church, the Roman Rite has, in the Latin Rite. What do you think explains this? So many people, they have visceral reactions against the traditional Latin Mass.
a reaction you thank God don't have. But why do you think that there are so many people who sort of do have a knee-jerk reaction against their own liturgical heritage like that?
I think there's a lot of layers to that. I think that one, ever since the whole the spirit of Vatican II has put a negative aura on anything that happened prior to Vatican II. There's a sense that anything happened before that was very much authoritative, very domineering and controlling, and kind of bad. I don't see it that way. I mean, the way I always tried to understand even the rules and in our house growing up and understanding the Ten Commandments is that those rules that God lays down are out of love, to help us out of love. And if we look at it that way, that's why I wanted to know more, because I saw a lot of, things that happened in the Latin Mass, were happening out of love. And I think that a lot of people have a very difficult time with that. I think that's what the spirit of Vatican II was, a rebellion against. I was almost like a teenager rebelling against his parents and saying, that's not love, and saying we got a better idea over here. And what it ended up leading to was chaos. I spent so much of my life in chaos and not knowing what the answers were, just floating, that it was tearing me apart. And so I was looking for answers. And I think looking back more and more to the traditions of my faith, why we do what we do was one of my reasons for falling in love with apologetics. It gave me answers. Why was the church doing what it was doing? Why do we believe in certain things? I think the Latin Mass does a lot of the same thing. It really affirms that there's something special going on up there. It reaffirms our tradition. I mean, understanding the way that God was upheld even in the Old Testament, understanding how holy the Holy of Holies was. Just that all just where some people could say, this is authoritative. I look at it as like, that's my dad and I love him. And I want to put my dad up on a pedestal. Yeah. And that's where I think they have become too. I think it's a spirit of rebellion against it, because it's seen as something bad. We've talked about this many times, but where we can see the same thing that's just kind of happening in a secular culture, where we see this turning of the Republicans and Democrats, where the Republicans keep asking themselves the questions: why are we losing? Why aren't our people passionate? And it's because they keep saying that, well, everybody's floating all over the place. What do we believe in? Well, our traditions help us understand who we are. And I think a lot of that's been rejected, and I don't reject it because I want to find out who I am. I think a lot of people think that when you start going back to the traditions, it's only for tradition's sake. It has nothing to do with the heart. And everybody is, seeing that they're just rules. They're afraid of becoming Pharisees, so to speak. And I just look at it differently. I look at it as more of a, no, these things were put in place to help me, not to hinder me.
If you think, for example, in the traditional Latin Mass, where you have the priest, once he has confected the sacrament, once he has pronounced the words of consecration, has to keep his thumb and his index finger together for the duration until they're cleansed after Holy Communion. Just that's a little sign of the reverence and the respect that had been shown to the Eucharist for 1,000 years in the Catholic Church. And now when you see such abuse against the Eucharist, which Pope Benedict and many bishops and priests have been trying to correct, where we just put it in our hands and we take care of it ourselves. You said before, it's almost like a rebellion. We'll take God on our terms, not on the terms of the priest or on the dignity of the ritual and so forth. So I wonder if when you see that sort of thing, communion in the hand, which was an abuse for a long time before it was tolerated by Pope John Paul II, not because he approved it, but because he said, well, where it's already happening for the sake of the common good, we're going to allow this abuse. And now you see it as the norm throughout the whole church. Does that to you, does that seem like it's breaking down an appreciation for the real presence of our Lord in the sacrament, to see him treated, even by little kids now, being trained in sort of a slipshod way with respect to how to receive the Holy Eucharist? Do you see that as a problem in the church now when more than ever, we need to have a greater appreciation for the real presence of Christ, and yet some of the forms that we're using, even in the reception of him, are leading to people lacking an appreciation and a respect for him, for the real presence of Christ in the sacrament?
Yeah, I do. I think that, even before all these changes took place, I think you probably had some of those rebellions happening within the heart. But now, because those rebellions are taking place and saying, we can receive in the hand, I think it's kind of like the slippery slope type of argument is what I would make towards it. Could you receive the body of Christ reverently in your hand? Yes. But we have to ask ourselves, is it prudent? Mm-hmm. Is that sort of thing prudent? Does it lead towards a certain attitude? I don't think anybody asks those questions. I think they just say, well, I should be able to. Mm-hmm. But then again, I think that is kind of a rebellious type of attitude. Why does a father try to lead his family in a certain way to try to grow them in love and holiness? I think that it was these things that were brought in lead to sloppiness, lead to not in and of themselves, but I think they lend themselves towards an attitude. So you could say, because I know there's many very good people that say, I receive reverently. I believe that. I believe that they do, and I believe that they want to. The question is, you have to ask yourself, what about human nature? Mm-hmm. And I think, looking back and just looking logically, here we had a time that this Mass was put into practice in a time when chaos was erupting within the church. That's what I have thought very interesting. Here we put in, the safeguards were put in to help keep focus on the Mass. And some would say, well, yeah, but yet it wasn't, because Vatican II just didn't happen out of the blue. I would say, well, fine. Well, let's work on those attitudes, but let's not start changing the what would you call it, the actions that we're doing and make it worse. Mm-hmm. Let's start now changing our actions, start changing our hearts. Let's get back to reverencing God in whatever way best we can. And I know that there's so many people that have such a minimal understanding of their faith. They have a hard time moving, and that's really why I haven't been able to go to a traditional Latin Mass on a regular basis, is because it's so hard for my family to understand. It's you have to move in slow increments, but I think that's the important thing, is moving in a deepening affection for what is true and good, and not just saying, let's just keep being sloppy and let's get worse. Let's move towards what is right, is the way I see it now. What's right, what's true.
I think that's, in a nutshell, that's what's summed up, at least from an outsider's point of view, the success of your organization, the Argument of the Month, where you're looking at this stuff without a lot of baggage. You're not a 60-year-old guy who lived through parts of Vatican II, and your parents were, in favor of all the changes and everything else. You kind of grew up in this attitude. There's a whole new generation, I think, at your age and younger, of Catholics who essentially are becoming, like yourself, tradition-minded Catholics. Like, we want our patrimony, we want our liturgical sacrality restored and so forth. We want to know what we are as Catholics, even liturgically, because how you pray and how you worship is, of course, how you believe. So I think maybe that's what the Argument of the Month is contributing to, in this willingness to sort of look at our traditions and not to have this us versus them attitude about tradition-minded.
Absolutely.
Because all traditionalists now, because we're so far removed from the revolution, if you will, of Vatican II, all of us have kind of incrementally come to this idea that, wait a minute, we're being robbed of something that's pretty precious, and we're all becoming stronger traditionalists as we go along. And I think, conversely, I think traditional Catholics, those who are traditionalists, need to realize that there are a lot of people like yourself who are fellow travelers. You're going to the new Mass, but you're trying to make it as traditional as you possibly can, and you have an eye, eventually, on perhaps bringing the traditional Mass back even into your own parishes. And it'd be great if all of us could sort of say, we're on the same page here. We're against novelty and experimentation and further going down that road towards chaos, as you say, even liturgically. And isn't it kind of interesting to think that maybe we can form a coalition between all those people who are sort of dissatisfied with the way things are going doctrinally and liturgically?
Absolutely.
And trying to find that sort of, omega point or whatever you call it.
If people need to, let's change the word from novelty to, ambiguity. Because that's what novelty does. It's like you start questioning, well, what's really important here? All of a sudden you start throwing in these things that kind of make the actions that people are like walking up to mass in sweat clothes.
Right.
What's really happening here? Does this mean I love my father less or more? You know, this is a public prayer. If my father was the president of the United States, I wouldn't walk out to his inaugural address, you know, in my sweats. Right. People, I mean, but that doesn't mean your dad isn't your dad. It doesn't mean you don't have good heart-to-heart talks with your dad, but you do that in your bedroom. Like Christ said, you go into your bedroom, you close your door. I think there's just such a knee-jerk reaction to say that, you know, if I believe in my tradition, as soon as they hear tradition, they think Pharisee. No, tradition is what was set out for you to help you love God, love your Father, and helps you understand who you are. You can't know where you're going if you don't know where you're going.
That's right. Well, I think we're getting a signal from our producer here to cut this short, but I really appreciate this few minutes that I've had to sit down and talk with you, because I think that the situation right now in the world and in the church is beyond crisis, and I think there are an awful lot of brothers that are out there who are struggling just like you are and just like I am, and I think that if we can find a way, all of us, people on quote-unquote your side of the aisle and my traditionalist side of the aisle, if we can just somehow find a way to say, wait a minute, we're all Catholics, we're all brothers, and we're all trying and striving to bring our church back, the human element of our church back to where it was supposed to be and where it was only a couple generations ago, I think we really immediately cast a wider net, and we end up having a greater impact on the liturgical and doctrinal restoration that's so needed in our church today. So, kudos to you for the open-mindedness that you've shown through the argument of the month to have these discussions that are, for some people, are very controversial. You're having them anyway, and I think you're having an impact. So let's just, let's just keep on going and keep the faith and do whatever we can to come together and form a powerful coalition for good.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks a lot for having me.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ken. Good night. All right, that's it for Remnant TV. We're here not in the Remnant Underground or in Remnant Forum. We're actually in the bunker for the argument of the month. So we'll see you next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.